Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again for the opportunity to share on the topic that we have prepared for you today. Pretty much in line with what VST has laid out in terms of the theme of the session. When I was preparing for this session and was asked to give a synopsis of a title to this presentation, and this stands out among my choice of topics. Though we have mentioned that it is 2020, one thing to take note is this result tabulation or the information that we're going to share with you today is a tabulation of what we have seen 2020, and it is actually published just recently in April this year. Okay, why did we call it the perfect storm in 2020? If you look at in 2020 and the year before, there are just a few combination of global events that has plagued 2020, and these are some of those that stands out from the rest, right? Of course, as every one of us in every part of the world is going through right now, the COVID pandemic. And with that, it is not just the pandemic itself that's affecting our way of life in terms of our health and the way we work, and as well as those with family, how you go for your education and stuff, right? But it's also one of the term that was used, I guess, it's also a push, right, in terms of digital adoption by a lot of organization as well as customer, and that resulted in a boom in internet as well as remote access technology, right? So that's one factor. Of course, another factor that has is not new to us in 2020, and in fact it was even before that, in terms of all the ransomware campaigns. And the unfortunate truth is the motivation behind these ransomware operators or creators. The motivation is generally more financially motivated, so they would not take into consideration in terms of the human aspects, right? Where you may be down with COVID, or there are patients that's visiting hospitals, right? And what we have seen is the expanded attacks, right? In terms of the targets, in terms of whether it's government, whether it's healthcare or even edu, right? So that really highlight that when these attackers carry out any of these attack, they would not take into considerations of your current situations. Last but not least, and to close off, year 2020, that's where a very highly advanced attack technique that the FireEye has called SUNBURST, and it really wakes up a lot of us, including FireEye, being when we were first named as a victim of a cyber attack, and eventually as we leverage on our expertise in terms of doing incident investigation. And that resulted us in uncovering the SUNBURST malware that it is targeted at the supply chain attack, which FireEye called it UNT2452. Though there has been publication by governments or even other cybersecurity vendors, everyone is pointing to be a nation state, a particular nation that's behind the attack. But from FireEye perspective, we do not dispute this, right? So if you look at all the ingredients that we have listed here, and that's how you can understand why we called it the perfect storm. And to illustrate, what we have learned in terms of discover in 2020. This presentation is largely based on a report that FireEye call M-Trends. What we do, this is our 12th year in the running. It is an annual publication, usually out in the April timeframe, where we have looked back in time in the last 1 year. So in this case, between October 19 to September 20, right? In terms of what FireEye has done, right? In terms of our the customers has engaged us during the course of running instant response on behalf of them, right? One thing to take note is any of this disclaimer, as drawn out, it has no representation of any work of any one of the customers. And a lot of these content is changed to protect the interests of our customers or any individuals. Okay, some key takeaways of our M-Trends 2021 report, where we have called out in terms of a ransomware proliferation. And if you look at ransomware itself, right, a term that we have used in our report, it's what we call as a multi-facet ransomware campaign, right? Why did we name it a multi-facet? If you look at the conventional ransomware operators, where they try to do a spray and attack, where to basically maximize the compromised victim as maximizing their returns in terms of soliciting ransomware. Multi-facet ransomware, in this case, it is linking back to what FireEye has always been preaching about targeted ransomware campaign, right? Where there are similarities between a targeted attack, the techniques used in a targeted attack, as well as a ransomware campaign, where the attackers actually do the all the planning work required to do the initial compromise, and at the late stage of the compromise, exfiltrating data before they start to encrypt data and soliciting the ransom, right? So that's one key takeaway. Of course, from a pandemic perspective, right, as called out earlier, where these operators and the attackers, right, has been leveraging on these pandemic situation that the global is going through in a few perspective, right? One perspective is, of course, leveraging on the news, right, of leveraging on the face and our interest in the COVID situation, right? So they basically use COVID as a lure campaign for them to conduct DR operations, as well as getting through to the victims, right? Another aspect of this pandemic effect is really exploiting of how the global workforce has been doing for the past 1 to 2 years, where most of us has been working from home. So in other words, now our attack surface, because of our nature of running our day-to-day operations, no longer limits within your office compound or your network. It actually goes beyond. There are some organizations that even allows the employees, right, to be using their own personal devices, right? And that's another aspect of the pandemic effects. Last but not least, and it's something not new, right? The proliferation of targeted attacks, right? Where one of the attack groups, we even named a new attack groups that is financially motivated, which I'll share a little bit in the report later. So while these are the themes, it's important to understand when these attackers are found, right? One of the key metrics that we track in terms of this report, right, is what FireEye term as the attacker dwell time, right? Essentially, it is the moment, the amount of time the a organization that has been compromised failed to detect that the attackers in their environment until they finally discover them. So the good news, not all is gloom and doom, right? The good news in this year's report that we're calling out is that the median dwell time, right, has actually reduced, right, from 56 days to 24 days. And if you look at the chart below, right, and it has come down drastically over the years, right? So that's really news that we should really celebrate over. But it also it's important to understand what constitutes behind this this huge drop, right? From 56 days, it's almost 2 months, to less than 1 month, right? Meaning now the victims are able to discover that they are compromised within a month on average, right? And that's where we basically dwell a little bit deeper in terms of what constitute in terms of these dwell time. And one of the aspect was, it is actually, kind of correlated with the ransomware campaigns, where we found that, there is, huge increase, right? There is a significant increase in terms of the number of customers or victims that's engaging FireEye in doing instant response behind ransomware attacks, right? So there's an increase. And if you look at the dwell time that is highlighted below, while the overall, all the investigations, including investigating ransomware campaigns, is a median, global median of 24 days. The ransomware investigation, the median times is 5, right? So if you look at, if we peel the onion and look at the specific, really whether there's a drop, because if you look at the nature of a ransomware attack, right, it is the attacker would need to notify you as soon as possible so that they can, solicit that ransom from you, right? So if you look at the if we take out the ransomware investigation, the non-ransomware investigation median dwell time is 45 days. So still very significant if you compare to the 56 days that is in 2019, okay? So now that we know when the attackers are found, and it's important to know what they are targeting and how are they targeting them. So in terms of the top industries, what came up in the last, what's similar in 2019 and 2020 is the focus on business and professional services, right? Of course, because of the nature of the attackers, retail, hospitality, as well as financial is still one of the popular industry that the attackers are going for, right? Of course, healthcare, given it might be related to the spike in terms of the interest if you guys remember, in early 2020, where all the biotech companies are actually trying to develop the vaccine, right? So where that kind of highlighted why healthcare was targeted in that nature. Of course, high tech being one of the targeted industry as well. So what's interesting in terms of the business and professional services, what fall into this category? And if I can correlate this in terms of the cyber supply chain attacks, and that's what these attackers are going for, right? So in other words, they may or may not be attacking these business and professional services industry to target them as a victim, but they are also using that as a platform to eventually get to the real target that they are going for. Okay, so if you look at what we have highlighted below, the attackers are really targeting both the interest in the pandemic situation, as well as how do we monitorize, right? So if you look at some of the attack groups that we have called out, right, AP 3241 and some ungroup, right? So for those that's familiar with FireEye, you will understand how FireEye basically named this attack group, right? As well as even and what we have done in the last 1.5 years or even earlier, right? Is to expose more threat intelligence behind attack groups that we have not really highlighted or collect enough evidence. We call them the uncategorized groups, right? So these are the industry as well the attack groups that's behind them. And look at the targeted attack in terms of one of the key themes in the report, right? If you look at on the top left-hand side in terms of the initial vector, and the reason why we are calling out all these data points is that when you are preparing yourself for the perfect storm when it happens, it is important to understand what are the techniques used by the attackers. So in terms of the targeted attack, you will realize that a quarter of the time, the attackers are still using phishing, still using known exploit, right? When they are targeting or conducting their covert operations, right? In terms of doing the initial infection. In terms of the objective, right? If you look at the objective of these targeted attacks, really they are actually going for financial gain, right? And how they are actually going against, a third of the time they are actually targeting their victims directly, whereas there are a small percentage, sizable but small percentage, that is actually conducting this targeted attack for the aim of reselling these backdoors to the victims. Okay, of course, on the top right hand side, we look at the objective of data theft, right? You will realize that a good third of the time, data theft, happens, meaning stealing of PII information or financial information, right? And a good 10% of them are going for intellectual property or for espionage purpose, right? So these are kind of the motivations that's behind these attackers. And if you look at the number of multiple threat groups, right? So we are moving. So from a targeted attack perspective, if you are asking yourself whether will this happen to me, right? And if you look at these victims that's engaged FireEye and our Mandiant Consulting to run this incident response, the numbers below should be interesting to you, right? It is not a single attacker that when we do our incident responses that we are finding in the victim's environment. It's actually multiple threat groups, right, that's identified in the environment. So I just want to call this out to make sure that you guys know the magnitude of the problem, right? Meaning these are the victims that suffered, cyber attacks, may have lost financial gain. And the more alarming fact is that there are multiple attack groups that's behind these attacks. Okay. So who they are? Let's look at who they are, right? So out of the 1,900 groups that FireEye is tracking, we basically differentiate them on the left-hand quadrant of the UNC group, right? Meaning these are the group that FireEye has seen in terms of enough of cyber clusters of cyber activities, cyber attack activities, but it is not insufficient for us to name them as a threat group where there is a known motivation or a known sponsor behind those attacks. And in the middle, in the blue quadrant, where you see there are 11 fin groups. One of them that actually graduated in 2020. So you look at the terms that FireEye use is really what we monitor in terms of this attacker and eventually graduating them into a targeted threat group, right? So in 2020, 4 of the 11 fin groups are SYN active. Of course, from the APT perspective, we have more groups in 41. There are 41 of them that we have identified, which these are state-sponsored ones, and 6 of them are actually active in 2020. The other thing to call out is while a lot of us, right, and I can't, it's no fault of any, right, where a lot of us are fixated. Whenever we see a cyber attack, we will assume there is a malware issue, right? What we're trying to do in this report is to highlight in terms of the malware that's actually used in these cyber attacks, right? While 500 plus may not look a big number, but it is sizable enough to understand the motivation whenever you see a AV alert or a misdetection by your AV vendors, right? And in terms of the newly tracked one and the observed malware family, there is actually a growing trend that there are actually new of these malware family being created in terms of SYN in incident response, right? So meaning out of the 514 newly tracked malware families, only a fraction, right, of them, 144 of them, are actually seen to be used in our instant response, right? One take back about this slide is that is to acknowledge that behind a cyber attack, right, there may or may not be a malware that is discovered or used in this attack campaigns. Okay. And if you look at the most frequently used malware families, beacons ones are actually still form a large part of them. Of course, the rest of them, whether it's backdoors or ransomwares, are also used. And if you look at what we are calling out in terms of the numbers at the bottom, right? Only 3.4% of the malware families are found in 10 plus intrusion, right? Whereas 70% of these malware families are only found in one intrusion, right? In other words, there's one particular intrusion that actually was using just one intrusion that's using a large part of this malware family, right? In other words, the rest of the intrusion, right, may or may not, like what I mentioned, right, use any malwares. So I mentioned about attack groups, right? And one that we graduated in 2020 was FIN11. And if you look at for those that's interested, do go to our blogs that we have actually shared what this FIN group is about. But things to note is that every advanced threat group that FireEye is named, right? We actually spent on average 4 to 5 years, right? In this case of FIN11, it was discovered. It was active since 2016, right? And it is actually using phishing as a lure or an initial way to compromise the victim. And one thing about FIN11 is the exclusive use of malware that allows us to track them as a attack group, meaning these malwares are basically signatures, right? Therefore, us to identify that this particular FIN group is in operations, right? And the way that they monetize soliciting the gains from a financial gains perspective, kind of reflected a broader trends of how these techniques are actually used in the rest of the attacks. Okay, other one that we call out in the report, right? So we spoke about the SUNBURST attack that FireEye has uncovered. We are still naming it UN2452. Still collecting more data. As we see them in actions. It is one thing to call out. I guess this is probably something that has bugged a lot of us, where including FireEye, where our key executive has spent their precious holidays responding this particular attack. One thing to note is this is probably the most advanced cyber espionage campaign in the history of cyber attacks, where the attackers has used very low malware profile, very highly skilled, where they displayed high tradecraft behind the way that they are trying to cover the tracks to evade any detection, and ability for them to clean up any of these evidence when we were doing investigation. But doing this investigation really highlighted the close relationship of the cybersecurity teams that you may have, right? And drawing from our experience, where there is a need for a deep IR capability, really ability for you, the victims to investigate, right? A very sophisticated attacker like UNT2452, while working very closely with the SOC operations, right? And if you look, for those that's seen and heard from our blogs, we'll understand how the initial how this attack actually first was uncovered, and that was really working closely, right, with the SOC team to discover anomalous access, right? And that really confirms the criticality of ability to be able to peel the onion, to be able to pinpoint an attack. In this case, nailing down to the SolarWinds infrastructure that a lot of the organization in the world has trusted to confirm these attack techniques as well as methodologies. Okay. So much about the storm that's brewing, right? So a little bit about the lessons that's learned, right? So we spoke about dwell time, and the important thing to learn about the dwell time, although if you look at why we are trying to highlight this is while we say the dwell time is 24 days, these in 2020, and we look at the vast majority of the number of days on the right hand side, there are actually victims, right, that still takes a very long time beyond 700 days, meaning the attackers has been lurking the environment beyond years, right, before they discover them. Or it can be as fast on the left-hand side, and that can be attributed to the ransomware. So dwell time, in terms of the lesson learned, make sure that you have a right mix in terms of insourcing and outsourcing, right? Although outsourcing is a big trend in Philippines, make sure you do have the cyber experts that will be able to select the right vendors, select the right capability that you need. In terms of prioritizing your analysis, right? A lot of times we are fixated with the problem that when there's no alert that my environment is safe, right? But if you look at it, a lot of times the breadcrumbs is the one that will save you before the real attack, before the actual attack happened, right? Other lessons learned, right? Don't wait, right? Don't wait from the situation to happen, right? Learn from these victims, right? That has, fallen trapped to these attackers. Be sure that you put together a validation and ability for you to measure your cyber defense capabilities, right? And it's not in point in time, but continuously over time, right? Last but not least, back to the fundamentals: a strong defense in-depth architecture, a strong network segmentation will allow you to slow down the attackers. We're not saying that you will be able to prevent all attacks, but slow down the attackers. In terms of the ransomware mitigation learning, these are the keys. So we also have published some blogs and some white papers in terms of how do you protect yourself and prepare yourself, right, for a ransomware attack. And these are the things that we have learned, right, in terms of usage of too many privileged accounts, in terms of having computers, right, that highly privileged computer accounts that's using SPNs. An unfortunate truth is these accounts, weak security. It's basically it's surrounding these privileged accounts that's actually using endpoint, right? What it means is that if the attackers manage, and if, remember what I said about multifaceted ransomware campaigns, these attackers, other than trying to solicit the ransom, one of the techniques that they're using is also stealing credentials, right? So having a weak security and ability for them to dump the credentials is what we have uncovered as well. Of course, last but not least, we have spoke about things like living off the land attacks, right? And we look at what the attackers has done in terms of these ransomware campaigns is also to use your tools like GPOs, right, to basically allow them to propagate their ransomwares. Okay. And of course, from a recovery perspective, make sure that you secure your Active Directory, your crown jewel. In terms of, there are victims that when we perform this investigation, restoration of the domain controllers are either not updated or has not been properly tested, right? In terms of the full restoration process. So make sure in terms of preparing yourself in terms of ransomware that you are adequately, not just looking at the security controls, but also the processes that the ransomware campaigns will be going after. Okay, so from a MITRE techniques, a good part of our investigations, 2/3 of them actually saw known techniques being used, and there are very minor portions that's used seen in very small portion of attacks. And we look at the techniques that are commonly most frequently used, right? These and how you translate this into the operations, your security operations, to make sure in terms of this MITRE T1027, make sure that if you know that half of the time, right, of the intrusion, the investigation that FireEye has conducted, it is using this obfuscated files. Make sure that you have the ability to detect these techniques that's being used. Of course, there are sub techniques like the RDPs, the Windows services, and PowerShell. That's really commonly used. Like if you look at the second one, right? In fact, in 31 of the percent, right, 1/3 of our investigation and intrusion that we investigated, all uses the Windows services, right? So that really pinpoint your pinpoint that you have to have the ability to monitor not just your for malwares, but common tools that's used in your systems and day-to-day operations. Okay, so a little bit of case study to share, which is part of the report. One of the case study that we have done is one of the technology vendor actually engaged us to do a insider threat investigation, where there was one of the admin actually went rogue, in particular their AWS admin, and what we have uncovered in terms of the lesson learned in terms of investigating this insider threat, it's network segmentation still is the best way to detect all these unauthorized access. Of course, logging as well as effective offboarding, where making sure that those levers in your organization are properly removed from an access perspective, right? So do read our article in the M-Trench report if you are interested in this. And of course, the other case study that we've highlighted is our ability, is how easy it is for fire red teamers, right, to basically capture objectives, right? So in this case, the customer has actually engaged us for two key objectives. One is to steal their executive emails, and the other one is to access, of course, the crown jewel network. So we were able to defeat, even though you have network segmentation, and that's why I said that having a network segmentation will slow down the attack, but will not prevent, right? But and it's proven in this red team used case study that we have highlighted in the report. Okay, so we do have an interactive tour if you visit our Fire website, that you can see how this red team was able to get through these attacks. Okay, so much about the background and brazing the storm and what are constitute, and how do we brace ourselves, right? So that's where we like to share with you, the Mandiant Advantage platform, right? Firstly, for those that's not familiar with FireEye, we are represented with two portfolio of solutions in our branding. One which is Mandiant, that is focusing in terms of our expertise, as well as our consulting services. Whereas FireEye, we focus on the technology side of things to provide the platform to detect, protect, as well as respond, right? So the combined portfolio looks like this, where in the latest, where we have announced, I think a couple of quarter ago, in terms of coming out with this solution called Mandiant Advantage, that put together our threat intelligence, our security validation as our XDR, or we call it automated defense, into a single portfolio. Of course, if you look at the right-hand side, that's where our product portfolio sits. So let's drill a little deeper how this actually come into play, right? So we spoke about ransomware. We spoke about there are, I think, earlier speakers. There's a concern about skills, and for those that is going big in terms of digital. There are basically multiple use cases, and I'll just use the ransomware ones as an illustration, right? So I guess what differentiates FireEye Mandiant with the rest of the cybersecurity vendors out there is a lot of times, and unfortunate truth is, all of us put controls as well as defenses during or is a knee-jerk reaction that we have to invest in something, right, during attack. how we are built differently, right? Is basically we look before, during, and after the attack, and it is illustration from a ransomware perspective, right? If you ask these questions, you have like whether you are at risk, where are my weak controls. This is where combination of FireEye and Mandiant services come in, where even before the attacks, from a ransomware perspective, threat intelligence doing a ransomware assessment will better gear you up in terms of where you will be able to withstand an attack, right? Of course, during the ransomware campaign or attacks itself, that's where the security defenses of our email network endpoint all comes in, as well as MDR service called managed defense comes in. Last but not least, of course, if you are breached, it's important to not say, hey, I've already cleaned up my ransomware and I'm safe, right? It's important to understand how did the attacker actually came in, and to make sure that you close up all the back doors or the holes that the attackers, and that's where the instant response services comes in, right? So that's how you see FireEye Portfolio coming together. So I spoke about Mandiant Advantage, right? Essentially, for some of you that may have seen this, so what we are trying to do, as you see the name itself, right? We are trying to put the unfair advantage of the attacker back, right, to the blue teams and the defender, right? And how do you do this? And it's just leveraging on our Mandiant expertise as a single platform, right? And what Mandiant Advantage essentially is, right, is a software as a service platform that's all things Mandiant, right? Meaning automation and the cyber experts that's behind it, and combining it in terms of what you are seeing it in your environment, right? So it's not only a singular where you read, right? But also how to basically look at what is happening in your environment through the XDR platform, and how the integrated platform looks together. It has 3 distinct modules, and the platform allows us to introduce more modules as time goes, right? So the current modules that's currently available in the Mandiant Advantage platform is our threat intel, our security validation, our XDR platform called automated defense, and the service is so transparent that it can be turned on, within a very short period of time, right? It is 100% technology driven, and what's different, right, is actually the Mandiant expert, right, that's behind the scene, and being assessed is actually a fully managed platform. And look at it, what we are trying to do with Mandiant Advantage, the platform itself, right, is to make sure that the early knowledge of Mandiant when we are investigation, right? So while we are preparing for our M-Trends report next year, right, when we are doing all these ongoing investigation, we want to get this information as fast as possible, right, to the consumer of this information as soon and as fast, right? Where we are able to, through the Mandiant Advantage platform, share early knowledge in terms of the what we have learned in terms of techniques of the attackers, the tools, and be it in the form of raw data, combining our data science as a expert, come out with things that you can consume, right? Meaning, how can you detect, right? How can you use this threat intel, translate it operationally into detection models, leveraging on how Mandiant scores a vulnerability, right? Or scores how real a threat is, right? Basing on what we are seeing in our investigation. And of course, from a perspective of correlating, multiple alerts of threat scenes out there, linking all this relationship that will impact how you attribute who is actually behind those attacks. Okay, as what I've mentioned, it's a single platform that basically combines this capability. And the vision that we are trying to educate here is the ability for us to enrich, right, your current security operations, right? Other than using the platform itself by itself that you will see in the screens later, we are also exposing a huge API integration that allows you to integrate tightly with your existing SOC operations. And if you do not have SOC operations today or looking at building one, this is also a platform that you can actually consider as a start, right? Without no heavy investment in terms of the infrastructure and stuff like that. Okay, so let's go down in terms of the three modules. So the first module itself is the FireEye Mandiant, a renowned threat intelligence, right? Where other than coming from the threat landscape perspective, you will be able to use the threat intelligence platform in our threat intelligence platform to build your own threat profile, right? So again, how do you build a threat profile? Is really looking at the country that you operate, your industry that you operate, and basically nailing down to what are the attackers, right, that's targeting me, right? So meaning, how do I monitor these attackers that it is really targeting me as a business, right? So again, the benefit that we are bringing here is to make sure that to know early, to prioritize, is to act as fast as possible, right, through the Mandiant Advantage platform integration. So as a snapshot, this is how the Mandiant Advantage threat intelligence module looks like. The different dashboard that shows you all the threat actor activities in terms of the trending, as well as the most active malwares and exploited vulnerabilities out there, right? So in the single dashboard, in terms of all of your threat intel needs. Okay. Secondly, is the second module is our Mandiant security validation module, right? So this is the internal view, right? Meaning, now that I know what's happening on the external, how do I have the ability to understand, can I withstand those attacks? So instead of waiting for the attack to happen, right, this module allows you to validate your existing security controls, right? Meaning, is my firewall, is my endpoint, is my network protecting me adequately? So the outcome that you will be able to get from this is to be able to measure, manage, and communicate, right, the measurements in terms of the matrix of how you stand when you run through a security validation to not just to your security team, but as well to your management. So a snapshot of running a security validation looks like that, right? So you'll be able to see in terms of the threat actors, right, that you are validating against, right? Meaning you get the TTPs and validate against in how much did I pass and how many did I fail, and how many of them did I detected or alerted, right? And all these are quantifiable, meaning every single bar you see, right, all the evidence actually presented that you are able to drill down in detail in terms of which are the one that's failing, which controls are actually failing you, right? So this is the second module in terms of our security validation. Last but not least is our XDR platform. We bought this company called Response Software earlier this year. And what we have done very quickly is to incorporate all these into our Mandiant Advantage platform. And this module delivers what we term as Mandiant Expert in the box, right? Meaning taking the knowledge of what our Mandiant consultant is and basically taking the alerts and events that's happening in your environment, right? And painting out basically automating the whole process, right? To triage, allowing you to use the platform to investigate, allowing your security operation to simplify without the need to maintain your SIM rules, your SAW playbooks, right? And everything, it is actually modeled against how FireEye or the Mandiant experts does in terms of an investigation. And there's a snapshot, as you've seen on the screen, is how when we collect, how our XDR platform automated defense looks like when we collect, right, endpoint events and correlate it against your environment in terms of the user accounts, in terms of your assets information, to tell you all the supportive evidence, right, providing you with all the supportive evidence behind a suspected activity, right? So that's how the third module in terms of the XDR platform looks like. So in conclusion, be prepared, right, to brace the storm in not just what has happened in 2020, right? Be prepared what's coming in 2021 and beyond, and knowing who is targeting you and how you can prepare better. And one of the approach is to basically leverage on FireEye platform as well as Mandiant Advantage. And for those that's interested to have a free evaluation of our Mandiant Advantage threat intelligence module, do scan the QR code to get access to this. Right. With that, I'll be opening it up for questions.